This video is brought to you by Incogni. Take a look at this face. What do you notice? I'm a white boy. From the way I speak, to my style, to my inability to do cool handshakes, it's just a part of who I am. I think. I mean, honestly, it's not something I had to think about a lot. Growing up in the 90s and 2000s, really, it felt like culture was primarily built around me. Whether it was slamming my skateboard because I couldn't do a shove it, or hurling abuse at noobs in Call of Duty, there was something to channel that angst. But things have changed, right? In the year 2026, increasingly these young white boys are no longer forming organic, communal, youth-led identities, and increasingly are having their identities shaped by algorithms, hyper-individualism, monetization, and political ideology. Today, we will explore the white boy identity crisis.
The same way not everyone can be a man is the same way not everyone can be English.
Me and Hassan, we're both multimillionaires. I'm 21, you're 23.
I just want to preserve this nation.
Okay, so it's worth us pointing out the obvious. You know, I am old and out of touch. I'm 31.
I love the young people.
So immediately we have to try and work out, am I just an old fart now? Am I just doing the thing, the back in my day shtick where we look at young people and we say, you lot are all fucked? Or is there something that's profoundly different in the modern white boy cultural arc? So for us to answer that question genuinely, we need to look at the last 3 decades, the 2000s, the 2010s, and the 2020s. 2000s white boy culture can really heavily be defined by one key individual, Eminem.
Hi, my name is, what's going on, man? How you doing?
I'm doing good.
Right, Eminem. You know him, the real Slim Shady. He's that white boy whisperer. There's no one as pivotal as Eminem for the 2000s for white boys, right? There's a video that I watched that is a major inspiration for this one we're making today by Dazir Said, and I'll link it below, but it's called The Eminem-Sized Hole in White America.
He gave white suburban kids permission to express frustration and alienation, but also forced them to look inward.
Brilliant video, definitely check it out, links below. But what Eminem did, right, was basically give an entire generation of young white people a language to express the contradiction of the world that they were living in. I know that sounds really wanky and it sounds like I'm just deep in it, but hear me out. You gotta think there was a massive chunk of like middle white America in the 90s and the 2000s who were living in suburban, relatively safe, comfortable neighborhoods. They had access to decent schools, they had video games, consumer goods, fridge freezers, everything that should make you happy, little Timmy. But there was a problem, right? You know, school sucks. Your mum's lame. Life in American suburbia is famously dull. But there was a problem, right? If little Timmy wanted to complain about his life, the immediate reaction from every single layer of society toward him would be shock. What are you trying to say, Timmy? We live in the greatest country on earth, goddammit. We've never had it so good. Yay, America! What Eminem did and what he was able to communicate in a way that no one really had before was to show that these feelings of alienation could even exist inside the supposed comforts of white suburban middle-class life.
A lot of people are going to relate to what I'm saying because whether white, black, whatever nationality you are, you know, there's a lot of poor people, there's a lot of lower class people in America that can feel where I'm coming from. You know what I mean? That's why a lot of things I say, a lot of people can relate to, like, oh, I've been there. You know what I mean? Intentionally
or unintentionally, Eminem was able to create an extremely rare moment of not only cross-racial, but cross-class consciousness. Through his music, he was able to connect the struggles and the feelings of alienation between the young, multiracial working class, the underclass who was in deep poverty, and, importantly for our story, the disaffected middle-class white suburban kid. All of these people from all different backgrounds felt the same feelings against the system they lived under, channeled through Eminem's music. But you see, whilst that is all true, Eminem was not out reading theory. He wasn't trying to lead a revolution. He didn't tell millions of his fans to go join a political party and start some big political movement. He didn't even try and offer a grand explanation for these feelings everyone was feeling, of anger, of anxiety, fear, loneliness. He didn't offer a solution or tell you what to do about it. Instead, Eminem's music allowed them to simply feel it and turn it into art, humor, chaos, theatrical rebellion, community, and, most importantly, culture. Eminem was the emotional release valve for the tension in white America. Before we go any further with today's video, I've been using today's sponsor Incogni for a while now. And I was pretty surprised to find out that my personal data was just sitting there available on the internet. My full name, old addresses, and even family info. But luckily, thanks to Incogni, I didn't have to spend days and days chasing each of these websites and companies to get rid of my data. Instead, with a click of a button, Incogni handled it all. Every single month, Incogni gives me an update showing me which of the data brokers have removed my data. Honestly, it's great just having the peace of mind not having to worry about this anymore. But what's worse, and people don't often talk about this, is having your data out there like this can actually have real life implications. If you're applying for a job and they search your name and there's a fake profile put up, or if you're trying to rent a flat or something, things like that can actually cost you opportunities. Incogni takes care of all of this risk by wiping your personal data from people's search sites and shady directories. As well, they've recently launched a new feature, which is custom data removals. So if you find your data on some random website, you can copy and paste that link into Incogni, and Incogni's privacy team will take care of it for you. Unlimited requests, unlimited peace of mind. So if you're ready to take your data back, protect your privacy, and stop shady dudes messing around with your data, go to incogni.com/Jimmy the Giant, and you can use the code Jimmy the Giant to get 60% off their annual plan. That's unlimited data removal requests handled by experts. Take your personal data back with Incogni. Anyway, back to the video.
Now with us has a special report for parents about the so-called emo culture. Read, what is emo?
Parents, there are some dangerous elements to this culture psychologists say you need to know about.
Yeah, so the 2000s, there was a lot of darkness, there was a lot of rage. You had Eminem going to war with just about everyone. Yeah, we had the emos romanticizing self-harm and how much they hate themselves. Wow, we get it, life sucks. But there was a paradox, right? The 2000s wasn't simply defined by darkness and nihilism. It was partly that, but it was also very colorful. There was a lot of banter, a lot of piss taking, irony, self-deprecation, and like a lot of this white boy angst, whilst very legit and, you know, sure, a lot of the nihilism that we were seeing was often, don't tell them I told you this, a little bit theatrical. In part, it was teenagers just experimenting with emotions that they didn't fully understand yet. The 2000s was very vibrant. Think about the amount of films starring people like Will Ferrell or Jack Black, whose humor was built around ideas of masculinity, like kind of parodying masculinity in a way. The confusing expectations that you'll one day have to be a real adult would lead to characters like this, who were just buffoonish. They would embarrass themselves. The TV show Jackass turned masculinity into this kind of like self-destructive parody. We would have so many of these big cool guy hero men who would save the day and be brave and heroic. Jackass was kind of similar whilst being brave and bold, but they weren't really heroic. They were just doing pointless, stupid shit. It was basically parodying masculinity. The humor of this era wasn't particularly polished. The stories weren't particularly aspirational very often. The 90s into 2000s, it was very much childish, self-deprecating, and in a way, a little bit aimless. What it did, it took the similar male insecurity that existed at the time and channeled it into something we can laugh about. A way of making those feelings not feel so serious. So this is all to say that it would be wrong to imagine the 2000s as an exclusively nihilistic period of time, or a whole generation sitting in their bedroom crying to My Chemical Romance. Whilst that was in part true, it wasn't the full picture. And it's important that we remember when we talk about 2000s youth culture and also culture at large, there wasn't one singular hegemonic culture. Like, think about it. For every moody teenager listening to Green Day was also someone listening to Venga Boys or donk music.
You know what you want to do with that, right? You want to put a banging donk on it.
And that's because a core part of what made 2000s youth culture was subcultures. So the subculture, I used to make lots of videos on this, and really, they were very central to the 2000s. Each subculture would have its own look, its own style, its own inside jokes, language, music, attitude, and often a physical space. For instance, skateboarders, right? They would often be at the skate park. The emos would often hang out at the park in the UK or shopping malls in America. The chav was often sat out front of a co-op throwing Haribos at you. And you gotta think, right, these spaces, while sometimes there'd be crossover, were often physically separate. This allowed for a huge range of very different specific identities to exist, all at the same time. You could be a skateboarder, you could be a metalhead, you could be a chav, a gamer, a theatre kid, a punk, or maybe some kind of strange hybrid of a few of them. And within the separation, like the physical space between these groups of people, that space allowed them to create a unique, organic identity. I'll give you one example, right? If you think of fashion, skateboarders would often wear baggy jeans. The reason being often was because they're very durable. So if you fell over, you wouldn't graze your knee. Us parkour kids would wear these ridiculous XXXL joggers, massive joggers that made you look homeless because they were less restrictive. They allowed you to move freely. But you see, whilst that was all well and good throughout the 2000s, eventually we would arrive at the 2010s. And there was something that came along that was beginning to change culture in the 2010s. And that was social media.
Letters, telephone calls, mobile phones, emails. The way we stay in touch with each other is always changing.
And for the people of my generation, the newest and easiest way to contact your mates, share pictures, and even tell the world if you're single or not is on Facebook.
So the internet had always existed as part of youth culture in the 2000s, but it was largely for wider society, not part of everyday life. And that's because it was decentralized. In the early days, the internet was chaos. Like, if you wanted to find a community, you would have to go and look for it. You'd use different search engines, maybe you'd get a website off the back of a magazine, and then you'd have to remember the URL, bookmark it, whether it was a blog, a forum, or a website, and then you would have to consciously decide to return to that website again and again. And this process was very slow. It meant that communities, cultures grew slowly because they required intention. And like, you know, talk to any of us old heads and we'll always romanticize early 2000s internet because it was beautiful, it was weird, it was interesting. But you know, good things can't last forever in a capitalist society. Big tech platforms spring up. You know, you get Twitter, you get Instagram, you get Facebook, YouTube, and they look at this giant, creative, sprawling wide web of strange ideas and little cultures, and they say, what if we eradicate it all and you guys use our shit? And like, it was inevitable, right? It was always going to happen. Having 3 or 4 websites to pick from is just going to win in the market. It's easier, it's more efficient. And so this once sprawling internet consolidated into a few very big websites in a process which is often referred to as the digital enclosure. Just like how in 18th century England, the elites fenced off common land, turning it into private property, tech giants of today have fenced off our social lives. In a book called Platform Capitalism, written by Nick Snychek, he basically argues that these big tech platforms don't just host our culture, but instead they own the pipes that our culture flows through. And they charge us a continuous data tax for us to interact with it and communicate with each other.
The thing with platforms is that as intermediaries, they're in a position to capture and control as much data as possible. The important thing to pull away from this is to say that, to notice that network effects lead to a winner-takes-all model. They lead to monopolization. So it becomes very difficult to dislodge something like Facebook once it's ingrained itself as the key social media platform.
And so, gradually, into the 2010s, a centralizing of all internet activity into a closed, privatized, and controlled space dominated by a few very large tech companies. And that would only be a good thing.
What I want people to know is that everything they're doing online is being watched, is being tracked, is being measured. Every single action you take is carefully monitored and recorded. Exactly what image you stop and look at, for how long you look at it.
They know when people are lonely, they know when people are depressed, they know when people are looking at photos of your ex-romantic partners, they know what you're doing late at night, they know the entire thing.
They have more information about us than has ever been imagined in human history.
Actually, let's be honest, right? The early days of Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter, all these kind of things, it was really exciting. These platforms were still being competitive. They were still trying to innovate and improve, stand out, be different. And I would argue, for us white boys in the 2010s, the internet gave rise to a white boy renaissance. It pushed us out of our comfort zones into new worlds. No longer did us young corkies have to just dress like Tony Hawk and only listen to punk rock music. Now, the white boys were wearing Supreme and saying cool new phrases like, swag.
Oh, I love the shoulder bag.
Spent 1.6K on Supreme.
There was new slang, new ways of being, new music, and the 2010s would have its own Eminem in the form of Tyler, the Creator.
Hello.
Okay, now what about your lyrics?
What about them?
What are you saying in your lyrics?
Nothing. Shit to piss old white people off like you.
So Tyler and Eminem have so many parallels, right? So Tyler didn't belong only to one cultural world. He was a young black lad who grew up poor in America, raised only by his mum after his dad had left the family. Tyler grew up deeply immersed into hip-hop culture. He had great respect for old rap artists, but as well, older black jazz and funk artists too. He could dance well, he would dress well. He was very much a product of black American culture. But you see, Tyler was not a one-dimensional person, because at the very same time, he was also very deeply connected to what was traditionally more white boy skate culture.
That's like a hobby for me, and I just grew around that all my life. So whenever people use like my skate like songs in their fucking parts and shit, I'm stoked as fuck.
He was on Tumblr, he was deep into internet humor, memes, obsessed with these kind of nerdy online worlds. Tyler's rise to fame was a pure product of the internet and social media, right? He would constantly post to Tumblr, he'd be designing clothes, posting silly videos on YouTube, directing music videos, and building a collective around him with a group known as Odd Future.
These are fans of Odd Future who are waiting to meet their heroes at a defunct store off Brick Lane in East London.
We just pop up wherever we at, set up shop, slang, and make our money. And we dip. Ain't nobody taking no taxes from us, no cuts.
The whole thing, right, Odd Future, Tyler Creator, it existed as this kind of like crossroads, this intersection between hip-hop, black American culture, internet culture, and suburban, predominantly white skate culture. And like, you know, this is the thing, right? Hip-hop in the 2000s, the 90s, it was already massive. Chart topping, big artists existed. You know, you had Jay-Z, 50 Cent, Lil Wayne. But culturally speaking, it always felt that black American culture was pushed to the side, in its own box, existing almost in like a parallel world as opposed to fully overlapping with dominant white culture. And even in physical space, it would exist in different places, different schools, different neighborhoods, different media ecosystems, different TV networks, and different cultural reference points. But as the internet arrived, it started to break down these cultural walls of separation. Once you no longer needed a record label or to get on a television network or a magazine editor to distribute your work, the internet gave the ability for creative expression to speak for itself. And so, from all of this, you had a figure like Tyler, the Creator, and many others taking over the whole world.
Tyler, it's me, Nardwar. I have a gift for you, finally. One more gift.
This. What is it?
It is Twink.
Yeah, boyfriend. Yeah,
When I think back to what Tyler, the Creator, represented to me as like a young white boy, was that his presence in hip-hop made hip-hop feel like something that we were now a part of and not just observers of it. Like, for sure, white people did listen to hip-hop before Tyler, but when you picture the like young suburban white kid with a do-rag on listening to Tupac in the 90s, there's always going to be a feeling that he's kind of LARPing, right? He's not part of that world. He likes to impersonate it.
West side. Just like Kyle, millions of white suburban kids have adopted black urban culture as their own, even though the closest most have gotten to inner city life is watching the movie Boys in the Hood.
Tyler and Odd Future fused these two worlds together and, you know, unironically gave white boys the permission to explore hip-hop deeper. Eminem might have been the first step for many young white boys, but very often they wouldn't venture out much further to black artists. They would maybe listen to Eminem or maybe some rap rock groups like Linkin Park, Fort Minor, Limp Bizkit. It was a very common expression to say the phrase, I don't like rap, but I like Eminem. This embodies the kind of distance between the young Eminem fan and the greater world of hip-hop.
What is it that draws you to hip-hop? You know what I mean? It's my style. I mean, you guys, colored people, can say that it's their music, but man, I can get down to it just as much as they can.
Who are you, man?
Did you just say colored people?
And like, you know, there's gonna be critiques that people could make about how then once white people entered hip-hop, that it changed. It was no longer genuine. I mean, you know, I think we could have done without G-Eazy. Nonetheless, there was also equally a big influence Tyler had on young black kids. Because Tyler never conformed to the traditional archetype of a rapper, you know, the stereotype of drug dealing, gang, women, fast cars, jewelry and all that, Tyler didn't, that wasn't his thing. Not originally anyway, but you know, let's not get into that. Because Tyler didn't conform to that box either. Like, you would literally have him wearing a bright pink Supreme hoodie, doing a freestyle rap on a radio show, saying how he wants to gay out with the presenter.
Me and Flex looking in the index for buff net niggas just for some hot butt sex.
What made you go with that verse?
So yeah, I always pinpoint that as like the beginning of this big explosion in culture. The rules and the parameters had broken down, and now there was a massive surge of creativity. Tyler goes on to influence a whole generation of alternative rappers, from Young Lean to Lil Uzi, and basically anyone these days. SoundCloud rap starts growing around sort of mid-2010s, dominating music and completely revolutionizing what hip-hop can sound like. The culture around fashion and streetwear had blown up, and now when Supreme would put out a brick, this was a big cultural moment. And this is the same sort of time where early YouTubers are becoming real-life celebrities. Twitch is turning gaming into this big spectator sport. Next thing, Drake's live streaming Fortnite with Ninja. But you see, whilst all of this stuff was happening online, a big part of it was online, it still felt like this was a shared cultural experience that was still somewhat based in real life. From real life meetups, conventions, the Supreme drops, skate parks, concerts, it still felt very tangible. There was a brief window in the 2010s where it felt like this new hybrid online real life culture had formed. But you see, underneath all of this chaotic creativity, the very same platforms that gave rise to these monumental cultural moments started to devour it.
So this demonstration, I think, illustrates the direction that algorithms will go in the years ahead. And what it's going to do, it's going to learn about your personal likes and dislikes, okay?
It's learning things from me. I'm actually changing the algorithm as I interact with it.
Exactly. This algorithm continues to adapt and continues to evolve throughout its life. The more films that you rate as like and don't like, the more it knows about you personally and the better able it is to make good recommendations.
All right, so the algorithm. You know the algorithm, right? The thing that brought you here, your guardian, your sensei. The algorithm kind of fucked everything, right? In a way. So originally the internet was very much like social media was chronological. If you followed people's pages, it would show you the posts that you followed. But you see, you know, as these platforms exploded in the 2010s, suddenly there was way too many nyan cats and forever alone faces, so they had to find a new way of showing people content. And this is where the platforms would discover a thing called an algorithm. These are systems that are designed to predict what content you are most likely to click on, which ones you're most likely to watch, to react to, and ultimately do the one thing that algorithms care for, and that is engage with.
The difference is the constant feedback loop. So when you watch the television isn't watching you. When you see the billboard isn't seeing you. When you use these new designs, social media, search, YouTube, when you see these things, you're being observed constantly, and algorithms are taking that information and changing what you see next till they find those patterns, those little tricks that get you and make you change your behavior.
The algorithm meant that you could go viral, right? You could have a post that was really good and everyone in the world would see it, or loads of people would see it. And on one hand, this was liberation, right? The hobbyist could now turn a niche interest into a career after receiving a global audience. You know, if you're a scooter kid, you could whack a GoPro on your head and now you're a superstar celeb e-boy. And that is great. Honestly, incredible. I remember watching an entire YouTube channel, which was a kid who just plays with insects. That boy gets 20 million odd views. He is a multi-millionaire for playing with insects.
Look at all these ants. It's incredible. They have completely filled up all living spaces that I've provided for them.
There is something beautiful we can admire about that, right? But you see, these new careers that the algorithm had blessed upon us, they come with a tax. And that is every single person, from the political pundit, from insect boy to scooter kid, all the way to your little bakery shop, you are now all competing in a global race to be noticed by an ever-changing and ever-confusing algorithm. And it's this pressure of the algorithm, this external force now on your passion, creativity, your hobby, would start to direct and shape the way that your hobby, your sport, your art would present itself. So I'll give you an example, right? In my world of parkour, the original way that you would share the content online was via video edits. You would save up some clips for maybe a year, grab your favorite Ben Howard song and post it on YouTube. It would be like a 2-3 minute video. And it's this format that was key to progressing the future of the entire culture of the sport. These videos didn't come out often. There was no career in making them, so you just made them when you had clips that you wanted to put out there. They weren't edited for engagement. They were purely edited in an artistic way that the creator wanted. And this meant that, you know, little off-the-cuff comments that the cameraman might make behind when shooting someone do a jump might become an inside joke for generations of freerunners to come.
Lache to Wednesday afternoon.
The very music that they would choose would go on to become the soundtracks of real-life parkour sessions. The clothes your favorite athlete would wear, the shoes they would wear, would become what you chose to wear. This slow and careful curation of culture, community, and art created a very specific and unique cultural identity. But then, in steps Instagram. Instagram comes along and says, you spent a year making that 3-minute video that 12 people saw. How about you just take the big jump you did, post the 6-second clip on Instagram, edit it to a trending song on TikTok, and boom, now you're a professional parkour athlete.
Pre this kind of algorithmic internet, stuff that was successful online was primarily through people sharing it, telling other people about it, or sending it to somebody on Facebook. But now most of our content, we don't choose to see it. It's just given to you automatically. So much of the choice and kind of the human kind of decision-making in what's valuable and what should we promote is now outsourced to an algorithm, which is purely dependent on objective measures of it. Like, you know, the obvious thing is attention and like how long somebody watches in a video. So whether that they're watching it because it really means something to them and it was impactful to them emotionally, or if it just shocked them and was stupid,
it's like hacking their
brain. It doesn't matter.
I saw this exact same thing happen in a similar world called urbexing, or urban exploring. Urban exploring is, you know, people who go and explore abandoned things. They climb up big towers. This was a very secretive world. They had forums where they would say which way you had to go, secret directions, and the whole culture was trying to avoid being caught so that they could preserve the places so that the community could go and keep doing it. And then YouTube comes along, and in steps a man by the name of Ali Law.
Good morning, guys. What is happening? We're in a place called Stoke-on-Trent. It is that time again. It's that time for a madness.
Wait, she's not looking. She's not looking. Go, go, go. She's not looking. She's not looking.
Right, Ali Law and a number of others, they realized that you could just put a GoPro on your head, film yourself do these incredible climbs, all whilst deliberately provoking security guards so that you could make the video titled "Breaking into a Water Park, Security Found Us."
You just cover your license plate. You just cover your license plate. Are you gonna hit me? You gonna hit me?
No. Put it out on my face.
And as you could imagine, these videos got millions and millions of views. And I'm not trying to shit on this or just say that every part of it was negative and bad and you must retain the old culture forever. No, for sure, there were inside jokes, there was humor in these videos that became cultural moments. Certainly, the culture did not become empty once it entered the world of YouTube. It changed, it developed, it progressed. But what I am trying to land on, like the important distinction, was that increasingly, in a wide world of different interests and hobbies, the driving force for the way that the culture is primarily experienced was increasingly passing through the filter of a hyper-competitive algorithm. An algorithm which requires you to repackage the content under trends and various metas that perform well in an algorithm. If Logan Paul does a big clickbait thumbnail with his face massive, and that's what starts doing well on YouTube, then that same visual artistic format will be used by the urban explorer, the parkour YouTuber. If some particular 7-second hook works for the fashion influencer, then that same hook might be copied by the musician. Increasingly, the cultural decisions of how you portray your art and your culture to the world, those decisions are driven by what will succeed in an algorithm, and increasingly, different cultures, different arts, they will look more and more similar, a cultural flattening into a presentation that is optimized to do well on a platform.
I was struck by the sense that culture overall was becoming more homogenous and kind of a little more boring, a little less compelling, and we're all just becoming more passive consumers of the culture around us. And I think the responsibility for that lays with these algorithms and the digital platforms that use algorithmic feeds. Like, they're just feeding stuff to us that is supposed to fit with our tastes, that's supposed to give us what we want to see. But I think in reality, we're having a much more shallow experience.
Now, look, I think there might be a thought in the back of some people's head, right? Which is that surely in the 2000s, people back then complained about the exact same thing, right? Surely the 2000s, after the 90s, the golden days of skateboarding, probably people definitely complained that skateboarding, gaming, punk music, it had all sold out and it had become mainstream.
It seems like the mainstream is very consistent in like blandness, being bland, like bland, boring TV shows, bland, boring bands, bland, boring blockbuster movies.
Now, sure, whilst these were massive multi-billion dollar industries at the time, and monetization was a part of it, the difference is the infrastructure of these cultures was still very real, very human, and very tangible in many ways. The economy of the culture would happen tangibly when you were at the checkout of the shop. You flick through the Argos catalogue, you grab your shit skateboard, you buy it, you leave the shop. But it's that moment, right? You've walked out of the shop. Now you've entered a place that no longer really exists. The inefficient market-free zone. When you were no longer buying the things, now you were just part of the culture. Back then, you would go and purchase the video game, you would go home and play it offline. Now, you rent the game. Whilst you're playing it, you are online and it is mining your data, spying on you, learning your behavior to know how to tailor its product in future, all whilst in the background, your YouTube algorithm is pumping you full of monetized content about the game. In an increasingly online world, time that is spent participating in a culture, whether that means that you're filming clips when you're skateboarding to post onto TikTok, or listening to a monetized podcast on Spotify when you're at the gym, you are now constantly feeding an online algorithmic economy with your data. You literally cannot fucking escape the robots. They are everywhere. They are in your mind, learning you, studying you, so they can sell you more shit. To me, right, as an old fart, what feels inherently different about 2020's youth culture today is that there is very, very little market-free space in anyone's life. And this affects how new culture arises. These days, instead of culture emerging organically in real life and then spreading online, now the internet tends to generate the aesthetics first and the real life community aspect is kind of second. Fashion is the clearest place that you'll see this, and the distinction can be made between what you could call core versus scene. I mean, you've probably heard these phrases, right? Y2K core, cottage core, goblin core, bloke core, dark academia, indie sleaze revival. So whilst on the surface, you might look at this and go, oh wow, look, the kids are doing the subcultures. But squint your eyes and look closer. These aren't subcultures in like a traditional sense. These are effectively aesthetic packages that exist primarily on platforms like TikTok and Pinterest because they grab attention in an algorithm. Like, what I mean is, if you dare go outside, right, go for a walk, you're not going to find a dark academia neighborhood, right? That doesn't exist. There isn't a place where like you've got teenagers wandering around with candlelight, wearing tweed blazers and quoting poetry. It's not a physical subculture. It is an online aesthetic that people might dress, but it doesn't shape their core identity. They pick them up and they put them down like costumes. Now, this actually has a name, right? A philosopher called Jean Baudrillard, he dubbed this hyper-reality. Hyper-reality is where in the modern world, images, photos, digital content can feel more real than reality itself. This is where the map becomes more real than the actual territory. When someone adopts bloke core or goblin core, they're not really joining a community. They're just buying a starter pack. You don't need to be going to football away days to dress like bloke core. I mean, I fucking own one of those shirts. So you adopt the look, but you don't actually have to participate in it. The participation's, it's an optional DLC if you want it. And this is for an identity that primarily exists on a screen instead of a scene. right? A messy local scene, like a group of people that hang out in this one particular bar, who over time, years, develop a certain dress sense, a certain humor, a certain type of music, formed through physical interaction. Increasingly these days, culture itself is presented as sort of ready-made identities that you consume online that are specifically designed for your visual engagement. Put it this way, core is like the spectator sport, as opposed to the scene being the participation sport.
The term aesthetic has kind of taken over what we used to think of as subculture.
Newer generations don't understand what makes them a subculture and not aesthetics.
Yes, we are losing subculture, and it is because of the internet.
So, I think, to answer our very first question, am I just an old fart or has something fundamentally changed? I think we can say safely, something has changed. Algorithms fundamentally change how culture is interacted with.
Vice wrote in 2022 that the instant accessibility of these trends and aesthetics is divorced from much of their original context, and that these have become empty signifiers.
So for our young white boys, all of this becomes, you know, a little bit confusing, right? All these big words, you know, enclosure, hyper-reality, aestheticization, bruh. I just want to vibe and or chill. The young white boy still has all of that same teenage angst that we all had when we was younger, but for decades, there was always somewhere, a place, a community where that could go and it could just express itself. A scene which would absorb that energy and reshape it into something typically expressive and communal. And you gotta think, right, because the archetype of the angsty white boy suburban kid was so culturally dominant for forever, rarely did they ever have to think about their identity that much. And they never saw their identity as something that was political. The white boy was just the default setting for culture. But you see, as the 2010s came around, something started to shift in the cultural landscape. And I would argue the shift in culture throughout the 2010s was very positive and long overdue, particularly for Black American culture, which had always been very influential in the backgrounds behind music, fashion, language, rarely really getting the respect that it deserved for its impact. Through the 2010s, Black American culture, along with hip-hop, became the dominant youth culture, along with internet humor and social media. As well, in the same period of time, 2010s onwards, as social media gave more and more people a voice to talk about more and more things that often were not talked about, feminism entered mainstream conversations in a way that it hadn't done for decades. Increasingly, we're hearing discussions about gender, representation, inequality, etc. All these things were growing in the 2010s. From a historical perspective, this period of time, the 2010s, will be seen as an incredible moment of the expansion of who can involve themselves in culture. New voices, new faces, new ideas, new styles. And for many young white boys growing up in this time, this will become part of their core identity.
Let's fucking go.
But whilst many young white boys, many young teenagers experience this positively, for a certain subsection of white boys experiencing these cultural shifts through the very distorted lens of the internet, podcasters and reactionaries, this same story of cultural expansion could be framed very differently.
These race traders become martyrs for them, and you have your own side are agitating for it, saying, yeah, abolish ICE, because, you know, they're being too heavy-handed. It's the opposite. They're not being heavy-handed enough. We should have martial law, insurrection act, military in the streets, where we will be pushed around by radical white race traders, by non-white invaders, until they have taken everything from us.
If the culture around you is changing, that can be framed as shared progress, or it could be framed as loss. If representation of different types of people in the media is expanding, that also can be framed as exciting, or it could be framed as displacement. And think about it, right? If you're a young white boy who we know has always felt slightly lost, slightly insecure, slightly angsty, and a little bit unsure about where they fit in the world, well, your ability to deal with that change and your understanding of what is going on can basically depend on which podcast does the YouTube algorithm decide to feed you.
I think people don't quite appreciate the level of danger that we're in from
the woke mind virus being effectively programmed into AI. Or if it says that everyone must be diverse, it means that there can be no straight white men. And so then you and I will get executed by the AI. Yeah, because we're not in the picture. You know.
So we're all very aware that mid-2010s, the online right emerges. And what they start doing is reframing all of this social change that is happening as a civilizational threat to predominantly young white boys. Moments like Gamergate politicized a whole generation of young white boys who previously didn't really care about politics. It happened after the cultural environments that they liked, you know, music, film, television, and gaming, had increasingly started having characters in them which were women and people who weren't white.
If you include too many white people, it is labeled as racist. If they are male, it's then sexist. But what if women did not serve on the front lines in World War II hardly at all? Spoiler alert, they didn't.
And look, you can say what you want about the historical accuracy of World War II games in which you can 360 no-scope people in, but if we just take a look at this character screen on Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which was like the biggest game in the 2000s, and just like look at it. We grew up in a world that was built for white boys. Just gonna say it. And like, there are other people in this world that we should also probably accommodate a bit. And like, you can't blame Tony Hawk's, that was the era. The market was primarily targeted at young white boys, but over time, more and more different types of people got into gaming. And so companies are gonna want to attract them with characters that look similar to them. And to be honest, this was all kind of going okay for quite some time until a group of YouTubers lost their fucking shit and decided to turn all of their content into discussions about how women are destroying gaming, and by extension, the world.
There is a sort of insurgent move in video games from a couple of wacky left-wing feminists, and these are sort of far-left, Israel-hating, socialist weirdos. Far-left feminists who say that every video game is problematic, that there is something wrong with all these video games. If you imagine the most wacky, stereotypical, blue-haired, overweight, furious, you know, fact-free, terrible lesbian, you know.
So these people, right, this whole anti-SJW stuff, they start framing feminism as a war on men. They would frame diversity and, you know, having black characters and things as anti-white bias. And increasingly, anything that was considered left-wing was anti-Western propaganda. These narratives are effective not because they're accurate, but because they plug into the exact same insecurity that young men always feel. The exact same feelings of angst, alienation, and just trying to figure out your identity that, in past, rappers like Eminem and Tyler Creator tapped into. Eminem and Tyler Creator were also edgy. They would also say rude stuff, misogynistic stuff, homophobic stuff. And whilst in the modern palette, we understand this is inappropriate, you have to remember that back then, these were just feelings that were never channeled into politics, but were just vented and expressed, never channeled towards political ends. And to the modern white boy, there can be a psychological discomfort when you go from being, in the past, the main character in everything, every game, every movie, to shifting into being just another demographic. That loss of status, that loss of position can threaten the identity of the young white boy. And that is important because it ties into lots of narratives that young white people are sold. We were always told growing up that you need to be the big strong man. You need to be like the people that rule the world. The heroes that you would see through film, TV, and history. So if all that expectation is on the young white man, they are supposed to be the hero, leader, provider, but increasingly, economically, when the middle class dream of owning a house and affording to have a family is slipping away, becoming less and less possible, you have lost that assumed position of status that you were supposed to have in society. That can feel painful. You can feel like a loser, like a failure, like you are not a real man. Psychologists call this precarious manhood. This is the idea that manhood isn't a thing that you just have by default, but rather it is a status that you have to continuously earn and prove through action. But as we say, when the economy makes this increasingly hard to do, young men start to get desperate. And in the modern day, instead of just expressing these young man feelings through the expressive, introspective, and explorative release valve of culture, art, and community, algorithms increasingly seek to turn this into an ideology which attempts to consolidate power politically and permanently fix the problem. Make the bad feelings stop. Make it all go away, please. And if this was channeled politically into a class consciousness, a shared feeling that all people of society feel this same feeling of being downtrodden by an oppressive system, working together to fix it, great, that would be great, but that's not what fucking happened, was it?
Just outside of the perimeter for the UKIP mass deportation march, and look how many police are here today.
Your Christianity is not the cowardly, wimpish Christianity that you want to make it. My Christianity is the Christianity that defeated Islamic Jihad 3 times.
Fuck the woman! Fuck the woman! What? No, wait. We love women. We love women. We love women.
But not like transgenders.
Yes, sir. We love everybody. No.
All gays should die.
So what we have to understand, right, is that these online ideological identities are primarily experienced and fed by a highly monetizable content machine. And the monetization of it primarily shapes the identity itself. So the culture that emerges from these spaces online often is shaped less so by just the people inside it and more so by what performs well on the platform which is hosting them. And so this causes a radicalization, a race to becoming more and more extreme. Because unfortunately for these ideological identities, the thing that typically forms the best on these platforms are the things that provoke the most raw, intense feeling. Anger, fear, resentment, conflict, envy. So with that, you end up with these very strange online identities forming, usually riddled with contradictions that basically just don't make sense. From the Mexican white nationalist Nick Fuentes to the Filipino sort of white nationalist anti-Jewish guy Sneeko to extreme misogynist and also sort of white supremacist, I don't get it, Andrew Tate, clavicular, HS Tiki-Toki, the anti-Jewish misogynist, guy who wears KKK robes, Myron Gaines.
But and then some guys are like, hell fucking no. I've noticed with black dudes, they don't like doing that shit. White guys, we're all like, yeah, well, I said we. Yeah, well,
We have this strange mix of people, some of whom love Hitler, like doing Nazi salutes, whilst many of them are also black.
They don't understand the things I say on Twitter.
It may seem very confusing, but this is the algorithm at play, baby. Because nothing is more surprising than seeing a black man wearing KKK robes or a black man doing a Nazi salute. And from here, yeah, there's a whole cottage industry of shock merchants and outrage farmers who, to their audience of often very young men, not even just white men, it's strangely diverse. Through their content, they make you feel scared, angry, desperate, jealous, but also laughter, bullying. They channel all of these feelings into attention and then that attention into revenue for them. And so as our lives become increasingly consumed by the internet, our phone is in our pocket, constantly recording everywhere you go. As these old market-free communal spaces are disappearing, when young men go and look for meaning and identity, they find them in these ready-made, aestheticized online identities. Whether it's a hyper-masculine Sigma man or the ethno-nationalist LARPer, all of them are packaged and monetized online in the exact same way as cottagecore or blokecore. All are built as empty aesthetics whose identity and behavior is driven by an algorithm incentivizing outrageous behavior to gain attention. So if that means talking like Nazis, saying Hitler is cool, or wearing a Jeffrey Epstein jumper because that is the single most shocking thing that you can say or do, guaranteeing it will go viral, then that is exactly what's going to happen. And yeah, 99% of this political right-wing stuff is happening just on Twitter, but even when it happens in the real world, even if there's protests, the protesters are almost outnumbered often by live streamers. People go there just to film it, to make these big visual moments on Twitter so they can comment on it, so they can give their take on it.
And one thing that I found really, really interesting that I saw there was there were enormous, the actual number of protesters, so that there were protesters protesting against hotels, and there were counter-protesters protesting against the protesters. The number of protesters was not that huge, but what there were a huge number of was citizen journalists. Just a guy or a woman with a camera, sort of live streaming, doing selfies, showing the protest and uploading the video to Facebook. And there were loads and loads and loads of these guys. And it was really, really noticeable how much media presence there was relative to What was actually a relatively small protest?
So I think it's pretty clear that this whole thing, this sort of like right-wing young white boy identity, it all came to a head in the second Donald Trump election, where, yeah, young men swung noticeably to the right. All the podcast bros got behind Donald Trump. Influencers were framing him like he's this anti-establishment figure.
Censorship. You know, I don't know if you saw what Elon had posted. Elon basically showed, if you were to Google Donald Trump about a week ago, all you see is Kamala. That's all you see is Kamala. It's crazy. Google was really trying to push her.
And this whole online media approach to get Donald Trump elected, this strategy was really effective, tapping into that young male angst. But you see, what really stands out to me and what really feels interesting is just how unoriginal it all was. Now, let me explain what I mean by that, right? When we had this right-wing online bro swing to Trump, it really felt like a performative and aestheticized version of elements of 2000s culture. When you see Theo Von interviewing Donald Trump asking about cocaine, it just felt like an episode of Ali G.
No, I would just do cocaine. That was really, yeah. So not just, yeah.
That's down and dirty, right?
And what is the problem with ice cream?
I have no idea.
It drips.
Okay.
So my idea is what?
To make a drip-proof ice cream.
No. Oh, that's a fucking brilliant idea.
When YouTubers started to bring back edgy slurs like the F word or the R word, it just sounded like Step Brothers.
Maybe we should just both bang her. And we'll put up with the in the meantime. Who's the you?
Or when you see streamers doing these deliberate provocations, these aggressive debates and big dramatic real life stunts, to me it felt somewhere between like Jerry Springer and Jackass. And it just goes to show how similar the feelings are, but the difference being that in the 2000s, all of these angsty feelings were expressed through subculture as a way of dealing with confusing feelings and emotions you don't understand, has now instead turned into trying to solve these feelings through politics and power. This right here is the significant shift in culture. See, I'm not just old and out of touch. I proved it. Shit was better back in my day. However, right, I say all this, and it is true, there was a young male swing to Donald Trump. There's certainly a young white, groyper, white nationalist movement that exists. However, the narrative that young men have en masse swung super hard to the far right, that narrative, I'm gonna be honest, is exaggerated. Like, Trump definitely improved his performance with young men. In 2024, way beyond what people expected, with young men aged 16 to 29 voting for Trump by 56%. But it really does go to show just how volatile these identities are. Where you jump forward to now, and Donald Trump's approval rating is incredibly low amongst young men aged 18 to 29. Just 25% of them approve of him, 67% disapprove. And across Europe, it's a different story as well. Youth politics still leans overwhelmingly to the left in most countries. In Britain, I mean, reform amongst the young age demographic are doing terribly, while the very left-wing Green Party are doing very well. Not just with young women, but also young men. And these have all different cultural contexts, right? In the UK, we have lived under a very right-wing government for 14 years, and we have witnessed our lives not really be improved. The younger demographic feel left out in the political conversation, where it seems to be dominated by people just wanting to talk about immigrants. And lots of young men are seeing through it. Across Europe, roughly 1 in 5 young men support a far-right party. Whilst it has grown from the past, this is still very far from the story of the far-right swing of young men for Trump, like in America. Probably there is an element that European culture and European societies are less alienating in their design compared to United States. Community spaces, walkable streets can reduce the feeling that society is some kind of brutal zero-sum competition for status. It might be easy to believe that stuck in a small suburb where people are addicted to painkillers in the hyper-capitalist hellscape of America, but a little bit harder to believe that if you're sat having a 3-hour meal with your friends in walkable streets in France. The truth is, in a lot of European societies, but Britain in particular, young men aren't all flocking to become hyper-masculine, ultra-nationalist white supremacists. But also what is starting to happen is young people are starting to rebel against the algorithm. You see it in the return of analog hobbies, things like vinyl collecting, film, photography, DVDs, reading groups, climbing gyms, amateur sport leagues, community workshops, dance collectives, music nights, etc. And whilst I will critique the elements of online culture that are negative, it is important to look at what Gen Z are doing and see what is good of it. Their memes, their language, their style. They are very creative, very open-minded people, and they have a lot of potential. And hopefully, as time will go past, they'll probably find a way of utilizing the internet to help build communities. I mean, recently I saw this video which was of a roller skating community in London, like old school 80s roller ring disco kind of thing, but making new tricks. They had a new style. It was like predominantly young black people. It was really interesting.
I saw it on my For You page one day, innit? And I just decided to pick it up because it looks sick. I friends, I read it. Basically, it was my cousin. He got me into skating, lit. I saw everyone skating on my TikTok. Just jumped on. Yeah, lit.
I was skating before, but seeing my close friends actually skate, it's inspired me to get better, and it just brings peace as well.
And these are the things, right? These elements that exist is what we and is what the political class should be trying to help, to fund more, to give support, to encourage. It is important to create spaces where young people can just fuck around and they have a societal benefit. If you think about the scenes that created big cultural movements, Liverpool's music clubs in the 60s, the Bronx block parties that created hip hop, London's punk venues in the 70s, grime kids in council estates in the 90s. Often, a lot of these things that became massive industries and cultural identities for people years to come basically were spawned by young kids on unemployment benefits, fucking around and creating something new and eventually building entire industries out of it.
Some of us have got jobs, most hadn't. We spent 6 months, 5 days a week, from 9 or 10 in the morning till 5 at night, learning to play instruments.
This is why we complain about austerity. Shutting down youth clubs and venues, or when parks lose funding, you're not just removing places where young people can stay out of trouble. You're removing the social infrastructure that allows the future of culture and industry to form. Relationships, networks, inside jokes, style, humor, and ultimately deep, rich, grounded identities. But you see, when those social spaces disappear, and they have been increasingly, what steps in to fill that vacuum is the algorithm. And the algorithm only has one objective: to keep you watching. So honestly, like, the real solution to the white boy identity crisis is for us to rebuild these communities and for us to push governments to fund the building of real world spaces. If those kids are rollerblading in a Sainsbury's car park, the government should be funding that and building that. Help them build a space that is theirs, that they enjoy, for no other reason than they want it. And by doing that, we start to build identity through community and culture, not through whatever the algorithm believes will keep you on the platform for the longest. We need to put rules and regulations on this tech so it can't exploit our vulnerable feelings and emotions in the first place. And if we do that, then those raw feelings, those angsty white boy feelings, and feelings that every young person experiences, can be channeled into something communal and collective that will go on to define their identity for the rest of their life.
You used to watch Jackass and think it was cinema, white boy, because it was. Now you have a newsletter. Now you have thoughts on stoicism. Now you say, I've been really intentional lately, white boy. Now you listen to a 4-hour conversation between two men discussing discipline in a room full of supplements. Now you have a cold plunge, white boy. You bought a cold plunge. There's a tub of freezing water in your garage, white boy, and you get in it voluntarily and you think this is growth. Ryan Sheckler did not need a cold plunge. Ryan Sheckler just skated. Don't forget who you are, white boy.
If you enjoyed that video, be sure to support me on Patreon. It massively helps me support the team. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Catch you in the next one. Peace.